Joining us now is Tyrone Docherty. He's the CEO of a company called Deerhorn Capital Incorporated. They're listed in Canada, DHC. Here in the United States, GODYF. Tyrone, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me, Don, and I wish the best of the season to your listeners and people watching you.
Well, you guys have been getting a lot of attention lately. Why don't you tell us about that?
Yes, finally, I guess people are starting to rear up their heads and notice us, you know, because we haven't getting a lot of attention up till now. But in the last month or so, two different magazine publications came out and did a story about Deerhorn, independent of each other and not at our probing, talking about how we're sort of setting a new trend on not only environmental mining, if you will, you know, being green and all that, but also our First Nations relationships and all the opportunities that are opening up. So the interesting thing is the two magazines, one of them was Business in Vancouver, which was nice, but the second one, about a week later, sort of got us a little bit gobsmacked, as they say. It was a magazine called The Narwhal, which is an environmental magazine for environmentalists. So if you can imagine how stunned we were that an environmental magazine is actually giving props to a mining company, but they see how we're trying to change how things are done, and they appreciate the fact that, you know, it's low impact, and we're not only with the restoration of the salmon gold and so on with the Tiffany's and Apple, which we discussed earlier, but also how the First Nations are getting involved and how we're taking care of their environment. So, you know, had anyone told me a year ago an environmental magazine will be giving you guys thumbs up, I'd be saying, like, are you kidding me? But it just goes to show that people are finally starting to take notice. And now you see all these funds that are increasing with investments, the ESGs, you know, environmental, social, and governmental. People don't mind paying a little bit extra as long as they know that their funds are going to help the people around the world, whether it's cleaning up water or whatever the case is. So once we start getting some work next year, or work program next year, we'll be able to start telling people, hey, we're still going ahead environmentally. But the interesting thing, when you mentioned we're getting a lot of attention, is that the Canadian Stock Exchange, which we're a member of, initiated a 6-week program starting in late October through November, featuring, it was called Mining Across Canada. And it basically each week featured a new area of Canada. The first week was Atlantic Canada, and then it started moving west. The next week was Quebec, and the week after that, Ontario. Make a long story short, it ended with British Columbia, where we are. And their intent was to focus on 3 companies in each region that were getting lots of attention. So they sent out a little note to anyone that happened to be in one of those provinces, if you wanted to put a little blurb about yourself, and, you know, they'll put a little, you know, a little flag on the map there for you so people can check you out. So when I sent in a little bit blurb on what Deerhorn was, the lady phoned me back and said, my goodness, is this true what you sent me? I said, yeah. She goes, well, I must apologize. Are you new to our exchange? I said, no, we've been on like 10 to 12 years. No one knows who we are because we're not out promoting fluff. So make a long story short, their process was they'd interview about 3 companies in each section, the Atlantic Canada, Quebec, Ontario, and the average interview lasted between 2 to 3 minutes with the CEO. And I suggested, because Deerhorn is so unique, that I would have my chairman of the board, Tony Fogarassi, who's not only a gold medal geologist at University of British Columbia when he was a student, but also a top lawyer in both natural resources and First Nations law. And our First Nations partner, Alan Nzerza, who owns 51% of Chiona Metals, to go and do the interview on behalf of Deerhorn. Well, as I mentioned, Don, the average was about 2 to 3 minutes for all these other companies across Canada. Our interview lasted 51 minutes. That's 5-1. Because there's so much to talk about. It's hard for them to understand that how can this little company with the First Nations partnerships actually be doing business with companies like Apple and Tiffany's, and working with an NGO out of Washington like Resolve. And there's so much going on behind the scenes. As you know, we're doing a little bit with COVID and all that with a company out of Houston. So there's just so many tentacles to us that if people look at us, they would say, no, it can't be possible. How can a company with a market cap of 1 or 2 million have all this going for it? And it is met with disbelief, and I understand that. But when you actually dig down and find out who our partners are, well, it sort of lets people know that there's a big rush coming if everyone can figure it out.
Well, that's a fascinating story. Once again, the company's Deerhorn Capital Incorporated. listed in Canada, DHC, in the United States, GODYF. Great story, Tyrone. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. Happy New Year to you, Don, and all your followers as well. Cheers.